Hello. Is everybody ready to get started? We only have 45 minutes, so we figured we'd just hit the ground running while you still are chewing. And there's not going to be a lot of talking that you have to do in the beginning anyway, so easy. For those of you who haven't heard me say something about APDs before, I'm Shamai Fitzgibbons. I'm a general surgeon at MedStar Georgetown in DC, and chair of the APD committee here at APDS, and APD now for like 9 years, something. We stopped counting. It's embarrassing.
I'm Nicole Christian. I'm an APD at University of Colorado and a breast surgeon. We run a mentorship program. And so if you're interested in a more longitudinal APD mentor experience, you'll get some emails on the listserv eventually about next year's program. And so please sign up. But we've come up with some workshops the last couple of years, mostly based off of the feedback we've gotten from our mentorship program about like, what do APDs need? Last year, we did a workshop, like, how do you actually write your own job description? Because it turns out that's what a lot of APDs need. And also, how do you actually, we came up with this workshop because our APDs in our program are like, how do I take all this work that I'm doing and how do I like get credit for it? Because that's really important, right? APDs do a lot of work. And so this is a QR code. I'll try to remember to bring up back at the end, but it's linked to the worksheet that we're giving. It's like, to a Google Drive with the worksheet and the slides. So if you guys want to reference it later. But we really, APDs do a huge amount of really important and critical work, right? Like you guys do a lot of stuff. We do a lot of stuff. And so a lot of those activities that you do are beyond the scope of classic research, right? Like sometimes you do classic research, you do like a pre and a post survey, you do an educational intervention. There's like, there's a statistical analysis, you do a comparison, you get a nice p-value. But there's a lot of stuff that we really do that go beyond the classic scope of research, or maybe you don't have research skills to do that type and degree of research, right? Like education research is its whole own thing. And so one of the things we want to do is to help you guys come up with ways to get credit for this work that isn't just classic research. I don't know, do people in here, does your like department chair only care about the number of publications that you have? Or is that just my department chair? But I think, all of this work that you do is really important for promotion. If any of you are in an academic setting, it's really important for like sharing ideas and doing a better job. It's also really important for personal and job satisfaction. And so it's also really important, I think, to demonstrate your value to the hospital or your program, right? Like people are like, what do you do with your time? Why are you doing this? What is important about this? Kind of creating a product that you can show them, that you can put on your CV, that you can put in front of somebody, sometimes is a really helpful way to get that kind of evidence in front of people sometimes. And so we're first going to start by doing a couple of case studies to start you guys thinking about like the work that you do and how do you get credit for it. And one of the concepts we want you guys to think about a little bit as we're going through this is like, there's all this work you do. Typically, if you put 5% more effort into it, you can probably come up with a pretty reasonable product. And if you put like 20% more effort into it, you can probably turn it into an actual like career kind of pathway, passion that's important for your development. And so we're going to go through a couple of things that we've experienced either in our own programs or from the APDs that we've worked with. And hopefully will be things that resonate with you guys as APDs for work you do. So we're going to go through a work hours example, like how do you apply this 5%, 20% concept, a curriculum example, 5%, 20% concept, and then a parental leave policy case study. And again, the 5%, 20% concept, like how is something that you're already doing, how do you really turn it into something better? So work hours. So who here has had an ACGME survey violation or warning or whatever about work hours in your program? Many of you, but you can apply this, to any sort of ACG, right? You get an ACGME survey. We, for example, 3 years ago had 6 different violations related to work hours. And so what do you do when you have a survey that has a problem on it? You like do some sort of needs assessment. Maybe you get a resident focus group together and then you come up with a plan. And so, what we did, to kind of apply this 5%, 20% concept, right? You take all of that work that you did, right? Which it takes a while, right? Getting the residents together, coming up with ideas, trying something out. It doesn't really work. You try it again later. And so what we ended up doing was we took that work and then we presented it at a number of things, right? So you present that work at a faculty meeting, like you ask and volunteer to show the work that you're doing to all the faculty in a meaningful way. Then you can also take it outside of your department and kind of share that with wider GME, right? You can like present this data at a, clinical learning environment related subcommittee. And then if the work that you're doing is successful and you're showing success, right, your DIO is going to be like, oh, there's all kinds of programs in our institution who have work hour problems. Like maybe you can present it at a bigger, wider meeting so it can help these other programs do it, right? And so then all of a sudden you've got this work that you've already done. You put together a few slides and now you've distributed this work and distributed this information beyond your own program, beyond to like other types of programs. And then you can kind of become a resource and then you can talk about how you've helped other programs at your institution fix their work hour problem. And so then if you wanted to that's like a 5% approach, right? That's like the work you've already done. You put yourself out there a little bit and you get all of this kind of opportunity to show your value. And then there's, and then you can take that 20% thing and then all of a sudden you can start working with, you can do some sort of pre-post research activity. You can turn it into a quality improvement analysis or, intervention. Work hours, frankly, if it turns out that there was like a real well-being aspect to some of this work hour stuff that you did for your residents, you can turn that into a wellness intervention. You can do all kinds of like qualitative analyses about this. These may not be skills that you necessarily have, but if this is something that as you were fixing your program survey, you got really excited and passionate and really dug into, these are other ways that you can move any sort of activity that you're doing forward. Again, this is more of a 20% effort approach, because if you don't already have a background in like qualitative analysis, that's going to be tough to just like whip together. But the point is like, if you're doing this work and it's been important to you, there are ways for you to kind of expand and build upon this work in a more meaningful way. Does anybody have any like personal examples of, like a survey, a bad survey result, or like smaller projects like that you were able to turn into something? Like start thinking about that for yourselves, because we're gonna have you guys do a little bit more worksheet stuff in a little bit. A new curriculum, I think, is another really great opportunity for an APD to, again, build on something and get more credit for things. So maybe you've been tasked with a specific wellness curriculum, or you just really, it's important for you that you've created a DEI curriculum. And so you want to, like, you've put a lot of heart and soul and effort into that. Maybe you changed the structure, just one of the last talks we were hearing about, like, the impact of changing to a whole academic morning. Maybe you've done a big revamp that way. Like you put in a huge amount of effort to make it better. Or maybe you've created a very unique and innovative leadership curriculum where you have your residents do some sort of like case-based learning. There's books that they read. You get, some sort of professional development thing, right? Who here has like created some new curriculum for their residents? Yeah. And so how can you take that and put, again, this like 5%, 20%, right? A lot of you have probably, who here has heard of MedEd portal? Most people good. So, a lot of the work that you probably already put in for your curriculum, the amount of effort you have to put it in to make it MedEd portal ready is actually, potentially very little extra work. And so thinking again about this like 5%, 20%, you've already put in all of this work, like putting in that 5% to the finish line. Or maybe you meet somebody else at this meeting and you're like, hey, we've been talking about our leadership curriculum. Why don't we share our material? Or like, I was recently approached by a different program about a transgender care curriculum, and like, would it fit into our curriculum that we could just like deliver it to our residents, right? Like then all of a sudden that APD is going to be able to say like, oh, this curriculum that I've developed, I've now distributed and is being used at like X number of institutions. And that's just something that's just like 5% effort of like making some connections at this networking meeting that we're all already at. Other ways that you can kind of advance your new curriculum idea into a more meaningful way is to collaborate with other programs at your institution, right? Like now it's surgery and OB and medicine. Because it turns out like, right, all of us have accreditation requirements to talk about like, you know, care for different populations and for high value care. And like, like these other programs can also benefit from the work that you've done, and taking that 5% to be like, hey, other program director, here's this work I've already done. Why don't you just like adopt it in your program? Or you could also expand it to faculty or APPs, you know, as our residents, as you know, medical school curriculum changes, our residents are coming in with sometimes a lot more resources than some of our faculty. And so some of our faculty, I think sometimes are like, oh, my resident's talking about like, you know, the like social vulnerability index, and I have no idea what they're talking about. Like maybe, and then you can turn that, some of that curriculum into something for faculty or even APPs. A lot of things APDs do is like create new policies. Maybe it's a vacation policy. We created a parental leave policy. And, you know, this was like a lot of work that I did that I was very passionate about. And so when you've done something like that, right, like a new parental leave policy that feels very specific to your institution, but you can actually, again, with this 5%, 20% concept, like you can write up a quick summary of it. And we'll go through some of these opportunities of where can you actually publish some of this stuff. Or similarly, you can take it from your program, distribute it to other programs, become a local or GME-wide resource. And then all of a sudden, you know, if you've like talked about it with people at a meeting, maybe they remember your name and they're like, oh yeah, we're doing a panel about about like pregnancy and residency. Like, remember there was that APD, let's have her be a part of the panel. And then, you know, all of a sudden, this is more of a 20% example. Then you start doing like pre-post surveys, you like start developing manuscripts, you actually start engaging in research, you develop connections and, you know, build collaborative research experiences that are more national. And then you can also like turn it into other types of scholarly products and manuscripts, like workshops that you can deliver locally or like at a meeting like this. And, you know, talking about something you're passionate about is really like a very easy way to start then becoming identified as like, oh yeah, there was that person I was speaking to at the APDS meeting or the, you know, National Society meeting, you know, they're doing some really interesting thing. Let's bring them out, you know, like offer to come out to other institutions to talk about the work that you're doing. And so we have a worksheet that we've handed out to you guys. That is the blank, you know, so the blank, right, the blank sheet.
I told him not to turn it over.
Oh yeah, don't turn it over because we filled it out. But we'd like you, you know, like work with like, you know, like turn to the person near you and start like filling out this table, right? Like if you did a new curriculum, like what are some ways that you could take a next step or turn it into what kinds of activities could you do with that?
I think some of the, like here's the workshop on the lecture. And the point of the workshop rather than the lecture is you require yourself to think about that. Think about that. Actually, now that our goal is to kind of mass, that we are doing other people's evidence, religion, but right now, and this idea of going to go back to the institution, and we can not get to there's all over these or other core faculty, but you want to go around here and go try and spin, don't do anything to gain a little bit more attention to yourself. So the system is not necessarily set up to, you know, have your own bag and fall away. You're awesome. And really good for research, like for like standard scientific research, it's designed for that. And we should global and we need to one of the population experience out there is more than mentorship, I'm sure that you're getting like your problems. So we really to concentrate just spend a little bit of time while the learning is really good to think about what is the way trying to do. And maybe also, I think, older than like, you know, I'm not sure, maybe you could spend something into different kind of life to be able into like a 5% line item on that's very low. But if the 5% is 20% down the road, your job, so it's kind of like, it can be really nice. You know, people are really passionate about the policy, same thing with me, and all those much more passionate, for example, about that, not that we can develop. And I think we will a lot of passion about policy and everything like that. And it shows that it's, so I think if you're, and then also, but when you kind of go back to, so are there any, before I go over to the communication for and it's also very problems so that so there's a way to you guys do very well and you know, get ready for it, not and then we'll be able to do that. A lot of people are thinking that's a great idea to do like one way a little bit of structure so that you can make longer term. That's very good. The other thing is you know, on that we switched our education time about 5 years ago. Okay, and it's a lot of much, but and it's one of those things that looking back on, I'm like, oh, that would if only I could have gone back in time and started that. Right. But like just moving that and then dividing it from staff, you know, and have those but maybe making that really extra access to spending. Truly technical. That, so let me share with you a couple of the next up, so that's like it's not being or it's all the things out there that are not like anything else or you want to do that, you want to do that, we're talking about that idea, and you're like, everybody is doing things, you know, people will see it, people will feel it, you know, what you did, I think that it's more than an opposite, like, what was that? Was that, but, oh, if only I heard something sort of 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, they're only,
Exactly. So one quick one that I just wanted to highlight, and my slides are going to be too high. is thinking out of the box. I don't know if any of you guys went to the ASE part of that for the week, but those are very brief, right? They do not require analytic, rigorous proof of concept. It is only a presentation, so it doesn't go into print, but it can be an opportunity and really fun if a resident is paired with you or a student's paired with you working on a project, and it's a cool new project that doesn't yet have like rigorous data or outcomes. Just keep that in mind. It happens annually. There's always a call for submissions from ASE. People just go have a box lunch just like you guys are and like munch on chips while listening to like kooky ideas that people have had and tried to roll out at their institutions. So that would be one example. This was something that was presented, I think, last year on, they just decided they were gonna do a resident challenge on video review. They ran it, we do all sorts of like Top Gun kind of resident challenges to spur participation and enthusiasm. So they did that and sort of presented on the idea. So it's simple stuff, kind of like that, single institution for sure. Another option is JSC How I Do It. Has anyone ever read those articles? Okay, so that's a good one. Data not required. It's like, really? Oh, okay. So like if you did something, I was just asked by my PD last week if we wanted to pivot, because I'm in charge of curriculum. He's like, are you sure you don't want to pivot back to like 45 minutes every morning? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't personally, because I don't want to be here for 45 minutes every morning with the residents before the OR, but it'd be a huge shift. We've always done Tuesday morning protected time for 3 hours. And so if you have a little bit of experience with one and the other, like I don't know a lot of people who have that experience, to be honest. How we do it or how I do it, you don't need data. It's very brief. And it's just like a teaching technique, some sort of programmatic intervention that you like threw out there and you want to share. An example for this one was, they decided to introduce a palliative care rotation. And how did that go? How did it sort of work itself out? They loved it, turns out, this program. And it came back, to rave reviews, but they didn't have like data. They didn't have pre and post surveys. It was just experiential. It's like, this is what we tried and this is how it went. MedEd portal, Nicole had already mentioned, but I thought, for those of you who haven't sort of tried to like dive into that, I'm just going to give you a little bit more of what that is, because the standards might be a little bit higher for that, a little bit more work. You do have to describe the results. So you have to have something to show. Typically they're pre and post surveys of, either students grasping a concept, residents grasping a concept, or at least that they liked it, didn't hate it, something like that. And then, who you were targeting and how you evaluated it. So an example that I love, I don't know, I'm also a clerkship director for the surgery students. And so I deal with mistreatment all the time. That's my 80%. It's like remediating residents. I deal with mistreatment. And Jim Lau was at Stanford and he developed this remediation curriculum that he then posted on MedEd portal. And the reason I love it, other than it's very well done, Stanford level of California level of acting, is that they have these wonderful videos. There's 8 of them. They're hysterical to me, not to other people. But they're great illustrations. I can download them and use them. It comes with its own like worksheet that I can just, print from the website. And then he has like a faculty guide if I forget what I'm doing or I want somebody else to sub me out. So it's like full package curriculum. So if you find yourself in a position where you've developed all this stuff, that's the kind of thing that MedEd portal's looking for, is like where I can download a class or a course or a session and kind of just copy and paste it into my institution. A little bit less labor intensive are a couple of these examples from the Journal of Graduate Medical Education. So not so much the innovation one where the length, you can see the word count there climbs up a little bit, but the brief report and perspectives are brief and perspective based, as the name implies. So brief, you're summarizing, I don't know, a new curriculum, a new teaching method that you tried, some sort of best practice that you think you've tried to deploy. And honestly, pretty limited outcomes here. You're not looking for multi-institution randomized anonymized data. It can be a small number of trainees. It can be one institution. It's supposed to be quite short. So, this place, they developed this cool sort of formative feedback tool that they really liked. Somebody clearly loved it. It was a crime of passion. And then they deployed it at their own institution with their own, small cohort of trainees. Is not a big deal. But this is where they put it. They put it as a brief report in the Journal of GME. And now it's like searchable and I can learn about it and they, get lots of credit for it. So another example, this is a good one if your institution decides to make a major policy shift, which turns out mine does all the time without asking me. Like nobody asks me. They just do it. They just do something big and then just like roll it out over all the GME programs. So this was an example of, this is like a year and a half or something like that into COVID, where they just did an opt-out therapy session. The system just offered it for 8 of their programs, single place, but 8 programs. And people were like, I wonder how that went. Like, how did that go? So this isn't even something that the APD or the, folks in the residency program had to imagine in their head. They just had to live through it. Like, oh my God, all my residents are being signed up from like a wellness mental health check with a therapist, and they have to opt out of it. So I have to explain it to them. I have to tell them what the deal is with this policy. So they wrote it up as a brief report. And, they get, it's really interesting. Like that definitely does not happen at my institution. So, yeah, Nicole was like, no, we do that. Yeah, exactly. So I found it fascinating. I was like, that's a wild and crazy concept. Perspectives is a little different. You know how she became like a real content expert in parental leave. Perspectives is an opportunity where you have a topic that feel like you've gotten to know really well. Let's say you really get to know remediation, or you really get to know like the educational formatting of your institution, and you want to offer an opinion. You just want to opine a little bit. This is opining. You don't have to have data. You just have to like have a point of view. So that's kind of interesting. Like these people had a strong point of view about the absolute need to introduce and maintain POCUS, point of care ultrasound, in our curriculum. They felt very strongly about it. It's a very short little paper. There's no data in it. There's a couple of citations backing up their point of view, but if you become the person in your institution who's like the POCUS person, go ahead, like write that up as a perspective piece. This is why I think this is really important, also because I spend all my time doing it. And you'll get, something that hits your CV. Last few examples, before we do a little bit more brainstorming is, has anybody by show of hands heard of either of these 2 journals? It's produced by the Association of the Study of Medical Education, ASME. They're really fun. They're very low key. If you've never heard of them, they're not surgery specific. They're education in medicine, globally specific. So medical education and the clinical teacher. I really like these for like the lowest hanging fruit because they're very practical and they are exceptionally short, which I think should attract surgeons. So one category here under the medical education journal is when I say. It's really fascinating. It's like just a 1-pager on what that term means. So like when I say, I don't know, MIS, like you could write a little piece on just like how the definition of that term has changed over time and how we need to be a little bit careful when we're using it. So they were defining non-clinical practice, which encompasses, turns out, all of our jobs. It's like medical education is encompassed in non-clinical practice. It's just a little piece if you become, knowledgeable about something and want to push it out there and again, have a perspective on it. The other one that I think is also really easy to understand is really good stuff. I do also really like, I read both of these sometimes, and so really good stuff is just that. It's like you got a cool idea and you really want to share it with everybody. Kind of like on Twitter. Oh, I thought I had an example of really good stuff. Yeah, okay. So this is like the video virtual game-based learning that they pushed out, and it's not much longer than, I clipped off the very bottom just to get it on the slide, but literally it's a one pager. So it's, you have an idea, you roll something out in your curriculum, you send it to medical education under the title of really good stuff, and it's very tight. These are very short. But you know, surgical educators can get a little bit more out there consistently. Clinical teacher has a couple of things that are very similar. They have a toolbox, teacher's toolbox, and a how-to category for submission. Technically, the length of these can be like 1,500 words, which is about, you know, 4 or 5 double-spaced pages, but most of them are actually shorter if you read the journal. They don't really want you to hit that max. The toolbox one tends to be pretty fun. This is a guy or a bunch of people, but they basically designed an escape room to train their residents to do some stuff. And I mean, clearly somebody spent an inordinate amount of time designing this escape room. There was like, it's just, so this is not my shtick. I would never, ever design escape room because I'm not like a techie kind of person, but they knocked it out of the park. And then this is like a step by step guide if somebody wants to do something like they did. So they already did it. And then they just explain to you how they did it. And that's it. It's like, you know, great. And you can read all about it and get, you know, and publish and get some credit, but it's really neat. And then this, you know, becomes the escape room team, should you ever want to develop something like that. And then there's also a how-to. This is a little bit more, you know, you develop some expertise in something and you want to explain best practices. This is similarly like low word count bar and good content to push out. My last slide is just safety. I wanted to mention it. There's a gazillion journals on safety. BMJ quality and safety is actually, I mean, I think its impact factor is somewhere around 5, and it's a tougher journal to get into, but it's an example of like a very tight word count, short report option that they have. They don't publish short reports every publication. I would say it's probably about 2 or 3 times a year. But it is supposed to be quite brief and reflect an implementation effort rather than a fully, you know, thought out soups to nuts kind of research project in QI. But there's a lot more examples in quality and safety that are out there for those of you who end up kind of in that particular field. Any questions about this? Yeah. I know. That's nice. Mhm. Yeah. 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 100%. Yeah, I know. And you, yeah. So do you mostly, so what I would say is I would start with, I like Journal of GME for this population. It's a relatively new journal. I think it sort of opened its doors in 2009 or something. So not quite 20 years in. It's very accessible. It had a lot of those options, and it's obviously focused on GME. Medical medical education and the clinical teacher are my second favorite, but I also do a lot with medical students. And they are sort of a little bit more like both residents and medical students. So you'll see stuff in there that's about GME and then stuff in there that's a big chunk that's about UME. So Journal of GME is exclusively. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Right.
So like all of these kinds of, right, short reports,
Yeah.
are really the product of the
Say, there needs to be nice journals for them to be, go read this and figure out something you want to
Mhm.
come back.
Exactly. Well, good you came.
No, well, that was like, it's perfect. Like, this night.
On that, I don't know, one of the where you work through, I don't know, because they, the people, when people is, list of sleeping with the floor, put together, all the stuff that possibly. Or not, or you were asked, policy. People need people to do their job, that are often service. But there are also things that a lot, so these kind of examples where some of that work. The looking at are involved, but it's policy thing that is not how it's good. But I think also, one of the things that we can have on is like maybe work, so like, in your own, like, either having things like how those things are like clinical specialty, stuff, right, or rest or whatever. Well, the ASD, like, APDS, like, these are very website. No idea what all, that are, but ASD has a great list. If you volunteer and show up, and like, start getting that. So, like, that's another way to build that work, and you can do it all that, like, pathways kind of get rid of the door again, depending on if it's like 5%, 20% kind of activity to do. At least, I love when you I just immediately never. But I mean, right? Like that somebody who was so excited. And like I'm so happy that there is like right there is not the things that are all excited about, right? There's so many good excited about. Today we're really want to be excited about it and see that happen. Spend the time to down, get credit to down. Hopefully there's a lot of things about on that, but any other subsidies or, the next work was going to have, supply, supply was described as example of how the person. Yeah. Oh, mentorship program? Oh, yeah, we really do not allocate it to this, for execution of the product. Yeah, we can do it, so that, people have, they're being involved, your own program. That it needs to be very, access to the, super excited, really looking up the stuff, looking at the time. So then you might have to learn and be like, disappear. Just thinking of PPE and now, oh, also, we've got sort of on the side. Got sort of on the bed over there.